welcome to the Clean Conference. I dare say you've already been welcomed, but I'm welcoming you again. There's one person who isn't in the room today, but I want to just thank her particularly because it's Caitlin Walker, as some of you probably know. She coined the phrase "at its best," and I asked her if I could use it, and she very generously said yes. And so I built a model around coaching supervision at its best, but actually you can use it for anything, coaching at our best, working at our best, as Caitlin originally intended. So I just wanted to honour her for being so generous in allowing me to use that phrase, and also as the title of the book, Coaching Supervision at its Best. And best is build, engage, support and trust. And those are the four words that I feel that I'm doing most of when I'm coaching and supervising. So that's just a little bit of an introduction. I've been supervising now probably for about 10 years. I did the Coaching Supervision Academy's diploma in Coaching Supervision, which was probably one of the best training experiences I've ever had in my entire life, because it went into areas that I had never been in myself. It covered things like psychology, which I haven't studied, and so I got a real insight into where I can go as a coach. So for example, I know now where I can go as a coach, much more, the boundaries are much more secure as far as I'm concerned as a coach. And so it really grew me, going to that course and having that training, really grew me as a coach. And that's where I think actually also coaching supervision comes. Because as a coach, if you do supervision, and if you're in supervision, you actually grow as a coach, you become a better coach, a better facilitator. And so learning those techniques really helped. Okay, so I'd like to ask you today to join in, because it's very participative today. I'd also like to ask you, when you are coaching and supervising and facilitating at your best, you're like what? And that's something that we're going to discover today amongst all of us. Perhaps share some ideas. So to begin with, what I'd like you to think about is, if this session were to be exactly as you'd like, it would be like what? So if this session were to be exactly as you would like, it would be like what? Just share that with somebody sitting next to you. Get to know the person next to you and just share that. So if this session were to be exactly as you would like it, it would be like what? Everybody got some sort of idea? Anybody like to share what you found out? What would you like the session to be? So if the session was to be at its best, it would be how? Anyone like to share?
When the end of the session, my boundaries would be clearer, you see, between supervision and counselling, chatting, therapy or whatever.
So the boundaries would be clearer?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Would anybody else like to share?
There is something that is new to me.
Something new to you? What kind of new?
A new idea, something that's not, something I don't think, oh yeah, I know that.
Okay. Something new, some new idea that you don't know. Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, James just asked me what my idea would be, my image would be, and I said that you would engage with the process. So I had a vision of people holding hands, you know, where you can sit on them when everybody's holding hands and link together, and I'd like people to engage with the session, hopefully, and to learn something new, as you just said. And also to have those boundaries, as you've just shared. So those three things we'll look out for. Okay, so let's get started. I'm just going to let you know what's going to happen today. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is coaching supervision and how it differs from the disciplines that you've just mentioned. Because several people have asked me what's the difference, and I'd like to answer that question. And then first of all, we're going to have a look at how you build, engage, support and trust. And we're going to do that in groups. And then later on, we're going to look at the seven-eyed model, which Peter Hawkins has very kindly allowed me to clean up. So I've cleaned the seven-eyed model, And I will be working with that today. And I've brought along some typical supervision scenarios for you to discuss. There's no right or wrong answers, it's just for you to discuss and for you to use clean questions in order to probe those particular scenarios. And I think through doing that, you will actually see where the boundaries are too and where the differences lie. So that's the session as it stands at the moment. And please give me some feedback if you'd like anything else as we go along. Okay. So let's have a look first of all at build, engage, support and trust. Just with your partner, decide what you think those 4 words mean to you. So if you were building, supporting, engaging and trusting in your process, working with coaches or working with supervisees, what would you be doing with those 4 words? Build, engage, support and trust. So just share that just for a couple of minutes with the person next to you. So if you were supervising or coaching or facilitating at your best, how would you be engaging, supporting, engaged, and trusting? Just share that with the person sitting next to you.
Coaching or being coaching, doing things, then somebody else looking at that. Things coming out of it, look at what it was, and somebody very do you want to
Okay, so we just come back together again. Have you had enough time? Yes? That was just a quickie because we are going to work more on that. But let's just address one of the questions that we spoke about just now. And I'm just going to ask you for some little bit of feedback from that discussion we've just had. First of all, I'd like to address coaching supervision. What's the difference between coaching and supervision and counselling, etc.? So what do you think? What's the difference? Anybody like to give an opinion? What do you think the difference is? Yeah?
I think in supervision is for the benefit of the supervisee's clients, whereas coaching is for the benefit of the person you're talking to.
Okay,
Well, actually, it's both for the person you're supervising and for their clients. So you've got to think about two people, whereas in coaching, you've only got to think about the one that you're coaching.
Absolutely. So you've got to think about two people. You've got to think about the coach and the person that they are coaching as well. Yeah. Anything else? Somebody had a question. Sorry.
That's just answer.
Oh, okay. Anything else that's different between coaching and coaching supervision?
You have a wider spectrum of ways of engaging with the supervisor, in that we do have some responsibilities as the supervisor for doing some offering of input or perspectives. We have some capacity to share experience or to engage differently from your own experience, and that you certainly don't have a coaching relationship with the keeping of the boundaries. So
yes.
There's something that's a bit different. The range is a bit wider.
Yes, I would agree with that. So the range is wider. So you're not only thinking about what is going on between you and the supervisee and possibly the person that they're coaching and the organisation, but you're also thinking about giving maybe, if necessary, some advice and suggestions to enable that person to move forward as a coach. I think that's what I heard. So that the range is wider. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. Anything else occurs to anybody? What's the difference between coaching and supervision?
You also have a responsibility in the supervising role, in that if they're doing something wrong, you've got to tell them so, which you might not, you don't have the same kind of responsibility when you're a coach.
Mm-hmm. And responsibility and kind of responsibility. And what kind of responsibility is that exactly?
In a sense, it actually refers back to the previous one of that you've got to think about their client as well. But it's like if they're doing something unethical, for instance, then you have a responsibility to point it out, which you don't necessarily have that responsibility. You might choose to if you're coaching, but you aren't responsible for the ethics of your client.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. I think internally, when you're supervising internally in an organisation, and you come across something that is unethical or immoral or inappropriate, as a supervisor, you do have that legitimacy to point that out. However, in coaching supervision, I would say I would coach that person to discover it for themselves, ideally, if that's possible. And I think James would definitely say that is possible, so I've learned quite a bit from watching James. And I would say that when you're supervising, if you can coach that person in such a way and ask clean questions that get them to the point where they recognise that they are actually being unethical, that would be the ideal situation. However, if that doesn't happen, and it is something that they're not recognising, then when you're working, particularly when you're working internally in organisations, to keep people safe, all the stakeholders safe, I think we as supervisors have that responsibility. So I would agree with that. Anything else?
We're looking at process, not content.
Looking at process, not content. I like that. Yes. Can you say a bit more about that?
When you're coaching, you're concerned with your model of what's where. When you're supervising, you're talking more about decisions on how you decide to look at what's where.
Yes, I like that actually. So when you decide, what kind of decide is that?
As a coach or supervisor?
As a supervisor.
As a supervisor, you're helping your coach, you're helping the coach find out their processes for deciding
where and when to put the questions to those benefit their coachee.
Lovely, I love that. Wish I could package that.
So do I.
Beautifully said. Well, it's actually on video, so we can see that. No, I like that very much because I think it's helping the coach to recognise the processes that they need to decide which intervention is the most appropriate. And I would take that a step further to say also that it's also recognising patterns. And I had a wonderful coach supervisor in Marion Way, who's sitting at the back there. And she showed me how my patterns were affecting the way I was coaching. And one of the things that I really recognised was that I tend to go round in circles. And everything I used to do was in circles. So I had to watch that, because some people don't think in circles. And so I had that pattern of mine was very useful. It was also useful to know that I see things in a sunny way. And Marion pointed out that not everybody sees things in a sunny way. So I have to be careful when I'm coaching to recognise my own thoughts and my own images and the images that are familiar to me, and I'm not putting that onto the person that I'm supervising. And that was really useful to me. So lots of different things, and also nature. One of the things I know about is that I use nature a lot, but not everybody does. You know, I coach engineers, and engineers don't really recognise, they recognise nature obviously, but they don't think usually in that way. They're usually thinking about more linear stuff and more diagrammatical things like triangles and squares rather than circles and oblongs, which I tend to think about, which was rather interesting for me. So I think to be curious about this is fine. Obviously, it's not something we're going to impose upon someone else, but we're going to recognise what people's preferences are, and then recognise that we need to look at our own preferences in order to be able to coach and supervise well. Okay, so anything else about the difference between coaching and supervising? Just one more comment. Okay, so for me, it's a much more robust process. And I'll take your point that you don't only have yourself and your client and your coach and the organisation, but you might also have HR, you might also have the line manager, you might also have 2 line managers, and you also might have your team that you're thinking about as a coach while you're in supervision. And so therefore it's the supervisor's job to have that overarching view. And I have a metaphor for myself as a supervisor, which I created in one of the clean sessions we had at the clean conference a couple of years ago. And I have a golden eagle. And I love that metaphor for me because I feel as though I'm hovering above, having a full spectrum of the supervision. I'm seeing things much more clearly from above, so I haven't just got the coach that's right in front of me, but I've also got everybody else involved in that coach's work in front of me. And I can see and swoop down when necessary, not to kill, hopefully, the coach, but to support them on the ground, to make sure that I'm there when they need me. But basically what I am doing is keeping that perspective, keeping that broader perspective as you talked about earlier. Okay, so I'd like you now to get involved a little bit. So just to go back to the supervising at your best theme, around the room you'll see some flip chart paper. What I would like you to do is to get into groups of 3 or 4, you can organise yourselves as you wish, get into groups of 3 or 4 and just rotate around those flip chart papers, and it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to write on them, so I've got big thick pens for you to use. I'd just like you to answer the question in a discussion with your colleagues and put that on the flip charts. When you've finished and you've done that for about 5 minutes, move on to the next one. So take about 2 minutes per flip chart in your groups. So decide on who you'd like to work with, and please rotate around those 3 flip charts. 4 flip charts. Anybody got any ideas? Usually it goes back to this one particular thing.
I don't know what to do.
There is uncertainty, so confidence is one of them, definitely, or high on the list.
That's not the one.
Confidence. It isn't the one I'm thinking of, but confidence is high on the list, actually.
Contracting. Contracting.
Thank you.
What was that?
Contracting.
Contract.
Contracting. And I don't mean writing and signing a contract together necessarily. I mean contracting in the sessions and recontracting in the sessions. So sometimes a coach will come to me with something specific that they want to talk about. And I have contracted with them to give them supervision around something specific. And during the session, something comes up and they don't notice that they have gone off on a tangent. So I actually say to them, are you aware that when we first met, we said that we would have this particular desired outcome, and now you're going this way. Would you like me to continue that way, or would you like me to still stay on the path that you asked me to stay on at the beginning? Obviously do that cleanly as possible. But I think it's something that comes up a lot. So for me, particularly when I'm working in organisations, and I keep on saying I do a lot of work in organisations, in supervision, it's about what the organisation's expectations are, because at the end of the day, if they have a coaching programme in place and they have supervision in place, that's a cost, quite a high cost to them. So they are looking at a return on investment. Now I hate saying that in this wonderful clean forum, but we do have to know that when we work in businesses and organisations, they are looking for some sort of return on investment. And we do need to make sure that those contracts are agreed by all parties. And I go back to your wider spectrum again. When you're contracting for supervision, the spectrum is much broader. And so therefore the boundaries are broader, but just, if not more, robust. So that when we go off on a tangent, it's rather like Caitlin's lovely target diagram that she uses. You know, when we have that desired outcome, if we go too far out of that desired outcome, I need to check that with my coach. Is it okay we go down this road that you're going down, or do you want to go back to what we actually originally agreed at the beginning? And I think that's again around boundaries. We talked a little bit about boundaries. It's allowing me to say, okay, yes, I can go wherever the coach wants to go, but if I'm working in an organisation, if that coach starts to talk about, I don't know, let's say a relationship issue, then how far do I go down that route before I say, okay, this is what we agreed, can I go down there? Is the organisation paying for me to support them there as well as here? And if I would like it to be ideal, you know, in an ideal world, let's say I work for Airbus, okay, I work with executives in Airbus, I know nothing about engineering. But that organisation has set up coaching and supervision in such a way that I can go wherever I like with those people. But some organisations, I work in a very big bank, that particular organisation likes to know what's going on. And they're much more restrictive in the way that I work. And so I think we have to judge each organisation separately and actually set it up the way they want it. So, you know, for them, what is the best at the end of the day. So, any questions, feedback from the groups that we had just now? Sorry.
Just what you just said, when you say they like to know what's going on, what's your contract with them about what you can tell them?
Well, exactly. I mean, obviously the sessions are confidential.
Yeah.
But there is a certain agreement about, a loose agreement around what the supervision is about.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, and that will be different in every organisation.
Yeah.
See, so I try as much as possible to cleanly get them to a place where they are accepting that wherever I go is okay. But not every organisation is ready to go there. So you have to, I think you have to be flexible in your agreements with them. So for example, Airbus is absolutely incredible. So is the BBC. But then, you know, some organisations I work with are much more restrictive around, we want to see this, we want this review or this report at the end of the sessions, etc. We agree that with everybody, all the stakeholders. And that's why I say contracting is so important. Okay, so any feedback from going around here? What would you like to feedback or question or ask or discuss? Just for a couple of minutes, because we want to move on afterwards. Anybody like to feedback anything that they talked about? Or key points? what conversations did you have when you were around the...
We had some disagreement about relationship.
Okay.
The relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee, and them and their clients.
Right.
And if you're working cleanly, whether you still have relationship in the same way.
Can you expand on that?
Well, the relationship is different, as you quite rightly say, the broader one between the supervisor and the supervisee. Then, if you're working cleanly, you still have a relationship and trust, which you need to work.
Oh, yeah.
However, that was something who didn't think that was so important.
What was so important? The relationship wasn't so important between
either level.
So how important is the relationship in both parties? So coach, client, coach, supervisee. How important is that relationship?
I think it's crucial.
I think it's crucial. So how do you build that relationship? That's what these were about a little bit,
right.
weren't they? So the first one is building that relationship. So I would actually give you a little bit of input here. I think one of the things that actually builds that relationship is that contract. Because actually when people come to me with a clear contract about what it is it can expect, that's something else which is very often left out. The supervisee, you know, how much training, how much information does the supervisee get before they come to you in supervision? Do they know what supervision is? Do they know what to expect? And if they don't, that needs to be made very clear. So I think one of the things that I would say builds a relationship is having that contract, whatever it is, whether it's a loose contract or whether it's a tight contract or whatever it is all the stakeholders have agreed to, if that is secure and robust, you already have started to build that engagement and that trust that you need. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what was the discussion around building, first of all? What did you have on that build? What were the key points that were for you for building that relationship? Anybody want to share? Well, I tell you what, if yes?
It's just about who shows up to supervision when you come as a supervisor. You know, so who is showing up when you walk in there? Are you showing up with integrity and humility and openness and availability and presence to listen? Or are you coming with an agenda? Or are you going to withhold? So how do you and who shows up?
So I think from what I heard you say is how you show up.
Yeah.
And I think it's both parties.
Yeah.
And in order to give the supervisee a chance to show up as they will be able to benefit the best from the sessions, they also need guidance. So it isn't just about the supervisor, it's also about the supervisee and the guidance that they've had beforehand and the way that they turn up. So in the training that I do, very often I help people to get into that mindset. And James had a lovely metaphor just now about the waves parting on the sand, a kind of separation, which I loved. And I think one of the things that I help people to do is to get a metaphor for how supervision will be at its best for them. So, and then we talk around that a little bit. And if people are not clear about what I want from them, I ask them to write something down, or maybe do, because in written words, I think very often in metaphor, I mean, I'm a very creative person, I like to write and draw. Not everybody does. Some people prefer to write, or write lines, or write words. But actually, we can clean the words as well. So written words are just as important, I think, in clean language as images are. So, for example, I had somebody give me a word one day on a piece of paper. It was just bird. So then I started asking clean questions around that bird, and then we got a metaphor. So very often people struggle with that. Did you want to say something?
One of the things that struck me about is there a model of supervision which is what I would call developmental model so that it recognises that supervision changes depending on the experience of the supervisee?
I think the full spectrum model is quite a good one that the Coaching Supervision Academy teaches. That, by its very title, full spectrum, does actually go into all areas of supervision in a much deeper way than, say, just well, not just, but the seven-eyed model, which I really love. But I think that model does actually go into all areas. And I do mention it in the book and as well, and there are images, I think, on the internet now that you can get from their website, but it is a superb model.
Okay, so it's not about, for me, it's not about the number of areas, because I think all the areas can be gone at, will be changed depending on the level of development of the supervisee. So,
yes.
You know, it's just that the issues change, supervising the issues change, and it seems to me that then supervision should change to reflect that. And I know it happens anyway, but what I don't know are any particular models that are built around the difference of when the supervisee is a novice through the developmental stages up to an expert.
Not that I've come across, actually, James. I haven't come across one that does that, and it would be very useful.
Because every one of those questions, that was the thing. Am I teaching someone who's in their first year of, am I supervising someone in their first year of coaching or their 15th year of coaching? It's going to be so different.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think there is a model. Well, not that I know of. I mean, I'd be, happy to be proved wrong. I'm not sure about that. But there is a gap there. Yes, you're right. And that's a really important point, because I think one of the things we mentioned just now about confidence, when coaches are starting out, it's the confidence that they need to I mean, I remember when I very first started out coaching, I wasn't confident at all as a coach. Needed that sort of that support, if you like, to get that confidence.
And not necessarily just confidence. I mean, if they're a novice, they may not know how to do it. So it is competence as well as confidence.
It is. It's competence as well as confidence, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on, because I'd love to capture these in some way, so I will try and capture these for you and put them on the website, so that you've got these, these words underneath the flip charts, because I think they're very useful, not only to me, but also perhaps for you too. So I will capture those for you. I'd like to move on now, because I brought some supervision scenarios and things like that for you to look at. And obviously in the book I do go through build, engage, support and trust, so in more detail. But I would also love your input, because I think, as I heard some of you say, trust is not the same for us all. Trust might be something for me, it may be different for you, it may be different for the coachee, the supervisee. So trust is something that's very loose. So is engage. What do I mean by engage? What do you mean by engage? So we all have interpretations of those words which will be different. So, okay, let's just move on to the next piece, because I'm conscious of time. Okay, so I brought along David Grove, Peter Hawkins's seven-eyed model. Is anybody familiar with that? Anybody used it before? So I've attempted to clean it a little bit, but obviously the clean questions that I've put under the model are just my questions, and they could be cleaned in a completely different way. So these are just examples, they're just samples of how we can use it in a clean way. So would you like to take one piece and one of those? So there's 2 sheets for everybody.
That's one going on, the other side is going on this one.
Okay, could you get into groups of about 5? And what we're going to do now is have a look at some typical supervision scenarios that I've come across in my work for you to discuss. And once again, there's no right or wrong, and how you might apply the seven-eyed model to these particular scenarios. And I think actually what you'll see by the seven-eyed model is that there are 7 eyes. and cover, again, we're talking about this much broader spectrum. Peter Hawkins goes through the seven-eyed model, and as you can see, it's about the client and their system, so what's going on for the client. It's the coach's interventions and what's happening with the coach relationship with their client and how they're intervening and what they're doing to intervene. Then it's a relationship between the coach and the client, and the client could be the sponsor or the line manager or HR, it could be multidisciplined. Then it's the coach looking at self as coach, so how do I develop myself and my skills? Then it's something called parallel process. Is anybody not familiar with parallel process? We may not quite know what that means. Okay, parallel process is when you take some energy or some feeling or some emotion from the other person and you parallel that in yourself. So for example, if somebody comes in quite angry or quite aggressive into your session for whatever reason, you might go out of that session and unconsciously start to be a bit aggressive yourself. And that is taking on the emotion or the feeling of somebody that's been in the session. Now, I had a girl come to me very recently who'd been coaching somebody had just that. She didn't understand why she was going home feeling very uptight. She said the word uptight, and we developed that a little bit as a metaphor. But she found that really difficult, and so what I did as a supervisor, I gave her some strategies to be able to cover herself and to put herself in a calm place before she went home. Because I think that it's very important for us as both coaches and supervisors to get ourselves into a certain place of calmness and receptibility so that we can listen to the level that we need to when we're in sessions. So breathing, imagining a place of calmness before and after sessions, because I think some people do it before, I'm not sure everybody does it after. And that will enable you to get rid of whatever the energy was in that room. We now know through neuroscience, etc., that we do take on the energy of another person in the room.
There is another aspect of parallel process which I think is very important to supervision, which is when the issue that the supervisee brings becomes the issue in the room. So they are working with a client, and their problem is that the client is stuck, and then between you and them, you become stuck in the room. So that's another aspect.
Yes, absolutely, and that does happen, doesn't it? It really does. And sometimes if you reflect that back to the person in front of you, say, look, it seems that we're both stuck here. I'm wondering whether we're paralleling what's happening with you and your client being stuck. And they go, oh my God, yes. The revelation is quite profound. It's how you get out of that stuckness then. Okay, and then the final two, is the supervisor's self-reflection. So how do I reflect after the sessions? What questions do I ask myself? How do I ensure that I come out of the session knowing more than I did before? To understand what's happening in the session for me as a supervisor, and my interventions, and what made me make those interventions, and what have I learned from that? And then the final one is the wider context, which is the organisational, social, cultural, ethical and contractual broader spectrum within organisations. So, I'm going to give you out some scenarios to have a look at. If you wouldn't mind getting into groups of about five or six, I think that would just cover it. So I've got just get into groups of five or six. And again, no right or wrong. What would you do in these situations? As I say, there's no right and wrong answers here. So there are perhaps slightly more professional answers, but there are wrong ones. Okay, so the first scenario I think you all discussed to a certain extent. What do you think that was down to? Anybody like to give some feedback? Contracting. Yeah. I mean, it's gently going to the contract, isn't it? How robust was the contract in the first place? Was the line manager fully aware of the scenario, the coaching scenario? Were they engaged? Did they sign up to the contract? Did we get them engaged right from the beginning? So it's about revisiting that. Anything else about that particular one?
Well, it seemed to be that if the supervisor was employed by the organisation, that was one scenario. If the coach was privately hiring that supervisor, that's another scenario.
Yes.
That's where I was getting kind of.
And what do you think would be the main differences between those two?
Well, that's what I was exploring. But it seemed to me that there's an ethical requirement for the supervisor to get back to the line manager and say exactly what we were just saying.
I would, in that case, I would encourage the coach to go back, because I think as a supervisor, it's my job to help the coach to be robust with their contracting. So as a supervisor, I would be looking to encourage that person to go back to the contracting.
Yes, that was the general feeling of the group, and I completely don't get it.
Okay.
Because you have also contracted as a supervisor with the line manager who's employing you.
But the line manager is not employing me. The organisation employs me to be that helicopter view, that eagle-eyed view that's up here. The coach and the client are down in the undergrowth. I'm up here in the sky. So I've got a very good vision of what's going on, and I can swoop down and advise if necessary. However, I try to keep that hovering above as far as possible and allow the coach to grow in the way that they're working in the organisation. Does that make sense?
So if the person who had asked for the information was the person who had contracted you, would that make a difference?
I think it would, yes. I would then go down and be with the coach and the client as well.
Yes, that's what I was.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, somewhere along the line there's the responsibility piece. So if you're in a large organisation, you can sometimes stay there. Sometimes if you're working in a smaller organisation and it's effectively the line manager that's employed you, then you might need to have that three-cornered meeting again. But I would also stress that in that three-cornered meeting again, I would allow the coach as far as possible to handle that meeting rather than myself. I would be there one step removed all the time, as far as possible.
Would it be three-cornered, or in that case where it's the line manager that's employed you to supervise the coach, would you have a three-cornered meeting, or would you have a four-cornered meeting including the coachee?
Including the coachee, yes.
So it would be four-cornered in that situation?
Yes.
I
would include as many people as I felt was necessary, put it that way, Helen. And I think you can't always be prescriptive, unfortunately. Okay, one more piece of... Sorry.
In that situation, the coachee needs to be asked really whether they want to have that meeting.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it might affect their job.
Yes. Yes, all parties need to be engaged in that, and I'm really sorry we do have to finish, and I'm so sorry about this. We could go on and talk about this for ages, and you have given some incredible feedback. As I say, there are some contractual issues involved in this one, and it is about going back and making sure that everybody's engaged with that, and it depends on who you're working with and who you've contracted to. Because it's not, sometimes when you're working internally, it can be a tricky one. But as long as all stakeholders are involved and you get the buy-in from everybody, then you're safe. So I encourage you to go away and think about coaching supervision at your best and what that means to you. Just to say that today only, the book is £7 and it's usually £9.99, so if you'd like to purchase one today, it's £7. Thank you very much for your participation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.